The first night I heard it, I thought someone had broken in. The church had been abandoned for nearly 30 years, its stained glass windows cracked, its roof patched too many times to last another winter. My role as caretaker was part janitor, part security guard, part preservationist. Once in a while, thrill seekers would sneak in, daring each other to touch the altar or carve initials into pews. I figured that's what I was dealing with. But the sound drifting through the nave that night wasn't the laughter of kids or the scrape of shoes on wood. It was music. Faint, almost like a memory. A hymn. I froze halfway up the aisle, broom still in hand, while the familiar cadence floated around me. Gentle, rising voices layered into harmony. The words blurred into one indistinct stream, but the melody was unmistakable. Nearer, my God, to thee.
Every step I took echoed sharp against stone. The church stretched into shadows, sanctuary candle long burned out, pews shrouded in cobweb. Yet the voices grew clearer, layer upon layer of thinning sound, as if dozens of men and women sang together deep within the walls. I whispered out loud, "Hello?" The music stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, heavy, expectant. My breath steamed faintly in the air, though the evening was warm. I checked the choir loft, empty, broken benches and scattered sheet music eaten with mold. Checked the sacristy, the basement door, every corner that could hide pranksters or squatters, nothing. Just my own heartbeat loud in the stillness. I wanted to believe it was imagination, a trick of acoustics. But as I closed the gates behind me that night, faintly, on the wind, I heard the hymn swell again. Softer this time, but unmistakably real.
Most people think caretaker of an abandoned church is a glorified way of saying groundskeeper. In a way, they're right. My bays are filled with dust, cobwebs, and patches. Hardly sacred work. No sermons, no congregation, no holy water or incense. Just, to me, sweeping broken glass from cracked stained glass windows that haven't shone properly in decades. The town pays me because no one wants the church falling into complete ruin. It stands tall in the center of the square, Gothic spires looming like watchful fingers, a monument everyone pretends not to see. Demolition would be too costly, too controversial. So, instead, they employ me, a warm body with keys, broom, and bucket to keep the place respectable from the outside. Every morning, I checked the locks. I sweep the front steps, chase stray leaves off the entryway, and oil the gate hinges before they shriek too loudly. Inside, I collect broken hymnals, wipe down pews scarred with graffiti, and make note of water damage crawling steadily through rafters like veins. Nothing about the place is alive anymore, not really, except it never feels empty.
That's the thing about old churches. They hold weight. Even abandoned, they thrum with residue. Years of prayers baked into stone. Candle smoke clinging to rafters. Stained glass marbled with grief and hope. I feel it every time I walk down the nave. An invisible crowd breathing faintly against the walls. Loneliness mixed with pressure, like something listening. I used to enjoy the quiet. The world outside is chaotic, loud, unrelenting. Here inside, it's just me and silence, the echo of my footsteps a kind of company. I grew comfortable in the solitude. Until the night I heard the hymn. Now I sweep slower. I check corners twice, sometimes 3 times. I can't forget how the sound had filled the nave without bodies, how the song had died the moment I spoke. No one believes me, of course. Mentioning it at town hall earned me a few polite chuckles and, well, these old places creak, don't they? But churches don't creak full choirs. Still, I carry on because it's my job. Someone has to mind these haunted stones, keep the spires upright while everyone else pretends they don't lean. Yet every day since, I enter with my broom in hand and one question in my chest. Will I hear the hymn again?
It didn't happen all at once. The voices came in pieces, fragments that wormed into silence until I doubted whether I was hearing anything real. The first time was during the day, sunlight spilling slant through fractured stained glass. I was sweeping the nave, head down, pushing grit into neat piles, when I caught it. Just a single note, high and sustained, like the tail end of a practiced soprano line. I froze, broom braced like a weapon. The sound quivered against the stone rafters, then dissolved. Empty air. I convinced myself it came from outside, a car radio, a busker down the street. But in my bones, I recognized the acoustics. That note had been sung inside these walls. Later, while polishing brass rails along the altar, I heard it again, this time a hum, deep and masculine, rising low as if carried from a chest that no longer breathed. It lasted just long enough for my hands to stiffen on the rag, the hairs on my neck prickling. Then silence smothered it once more.
It wasn't random. The pieces belonged to something larger. Even in fragments, I could hear the cadence, the pauses between breaths, like notes of a hymn waiting to be assembled. Then came the overlapping. I was clearing broken pews from the choir loft when multiple voices layered, faint behind me. A hush of sopranos, a tenor threading low beneath them. The air filled with half-formed words pressed against stone, syllables drowned in reverb. Almost familiar, almost human. I spun fast, nearly slipping on the warped wood. Empty loft, no shadows, no dust disturbed except my own frantic footprints. Silence returned, thick and guilty, as if the church itself had been caught singing and didn't want me to notice. That night, lying awake, I caught myself humming fragments I shouldn't have known, melodies threaded in my mind like splinters, foreign yet lodged too deep to remove. The choir wasn't gone. It was rehearsing, and I was beginning to fear I was the only audience left.
For weeks, I told myself the voices could be explained. Old wood carries sound strangely, stone amplifies cracks. My brain filled in missing notes. A dozen excuses. Then the hymnals returned. I noticed the first one on a Tuesday, while dusting pews in the nave. A green-bound songbook rested neatly on the fifth pew back, right in the center. The last time I'd seen one was months earlier, half-rotted, in the basement storage. I had boxed the rest years ago, their spines brittle, pages warped from mildew. None should have been upstairs. I picked it up carefully. The edges were clean, almost new. When I flipped through, the pages bore faint pencil notations, breathing marks, underlined staves, notes left behind by singers who had practiced the music. My hands shook, dust falling through my fingers. Then there was another, 2 pews down. Then 3 more spread around the nave. By the end of the week, at least a dozen hymnals had appeared, each open to the same page, Lux Eterna, Light Eternal. It unsettled me because the voices at night, they had been building toward that same hymn. Worse still, the marks and the margins varied, some hurried, messy, others immaculate, professional, some even written in ink too fresh to belong to a 50-year-old text. Every morning after, more appeared. Left open, pages braced with invisible hands as though waiting on cue. No one else had keys. No footprints other than mine marked the dust. And yet the hymnals multiplied, crawling across pews until the choir loft looked furnished again, restored by hands I never saw. The town doesn't visit anymore, but the choir clearly remained. Their preparations taunted me, proof that they weren't just phantoms of sound, but something closer, something patient. Then, the organ. I was sweeping the chancel when a single note thrummed loudly through the nave, vibrating boards beneath my feet. It rang deep, majestic, E-natural. I stumbled, gazed toward the organ pipes cowering behind the altar. They were covered in dust, bellows long collapsed.
it couldn't have played. Yet the note persisted for 3 seconds, long enough to rattle picture frames in the sacristy. I dared approach the console. Keys remained unmoved, foot pedals leaned slack, dust undisturbed. But when I slid my hand across the ivory, a faint warmth lingered, as though someone had just lifted their hand away. The voices, the hymnals, the organ, echoes of something that should no longer exist. I no longer asked whether the choir was real. Instead, I wondered when I'd hear them sing together again.
It happened on a Saturday night. I had stayed later than usual, patching leaks in the north transept roof. By the time I dragged my ladder inside, dusk had settled in, and the church was a hollow silhouette of itself, light bleeding through fractured stained glass in wan streaks. I should have gone home, but as I crossed the nave, I heard it. Soft at first, then bolder, layer over layer of voices weaving together. No fragments this time, no broken whispers hiding in dust. This was song. The hymn swelled, filling every crack, every rotten beam, powerful enough to shake the ground under my feet. The air vibrated like a living lung expanding around me. And then I saw them. At first, just shadows, darker than the dim light should allow, rising in the empty choir loft. Then details formed, impossible as breath. Robes, long burned to ash, now clung in tatters to skeletal frames. Faces pale, half erased by time and fire, yet mouths stretched wide in perfect vowels. Some still bore the shape of flesh, others no more than moving bone. 40 voices matched seamlessly, eyes fixed forward, not on me, but on the altar, as though still singing praise to a God who hadn't saved them. Their heads bobbed in rhythm, hands rising faintly to turn spectral pages of hymnals no longer there.
I clutched the railing to keep from sinking. My knees wanted to fold. The sound was too rich, too full. Not a ghostly whisper, but solid, forceful harmony. A living choir in a dead building. And when I blinked, they were gone. The loft returned to shadow, pews empty, hymnals closed. Silence rattled in my ears as if I'd been plunged underwater. Dust floated lazily through golden shafts as though nothing had stirred it. But the echo remained. Faint vibrations lingered in the stone walls, a chorus engraved into the structure itself. My heart thundered in my throat as I staggered back toward the door, whispering assurances that this was all a tired dream. Then I noticed my mistake. In my pocket lay scraps of paper I hadn't carried in, torn from hymnals, covered in frantic notes I hadn't written. One phrase scrawled again and again in dark pencil strokes. They never left. The scraps kept appearing after that night. I would lock the doors, sweep clean the pews, and leave everything tidy, but when I returned in the morning, folded slips of paper would be waiting, left on the lectern, tucked carefully between hymnals, even pinned once beneath the rusting candle snuffer by the altar. They weren't old, brittle pages. They were fresh torn, ragged edges, graphite still smudging when I touched it, scrawled words in shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. At first, I thought they were confessions, maybe desperate attempts scribbled decades ago before the fire consumed the choir. But the ink was never the same. The handwriting shifted from slip to slip. Some were written in a child's clumsy block letters, some elegant, almost ornate script, one written backward as if meant to be read in a mirror. They all carried the same title, though, Rules for the Choir, and beneath the warnings. Rule 1, never join in the singing. Even if you know the words, keep silent. Rule 2, never enter once the Gloria begins. The voices are not for you. Rule 3, do not meet their eyes. Their gaze is only for God. Rule 4, if they stop singing suddenly, leave at once. Do not wait for the hymn to resume. Rule 5, the front pew is always reserved. You will not like who sits there.
I read these notes under the dim glow of my desk lamp, each word carving deeper dread. They weren't the exaggerations of pranksters. They were precise, experienced,
rules meant to protect. One slip had fresh ash smudged onto the bottom, as though pulled from a fire only seconds before. Another note ended abruptly mid-sentence. If the sopranos fall out of tune, close your... And then nothing, pencil broken and denting the page. The final scrap chilled me worst. Found in my own coat pocket, though I had never placed it there. It carried 2 words only. Last warning. I stopped sleeping well. Every footstep in the nave echoed like applause. Every draft rattling old wood sounded like voices drawing breath. The rules crowded my mind whenever I swept the floor, whenever I patched cracks in stained glass. But one sledgehammer thought crushed me hardest. I had already broken Rule 1. That night when I hummed softly without thinking, I had joined for only a second. And if these rules were real, then the choir already knew me.
They say once you know the rules, the real test is obeying them. I failed almost immediately. It was late, rain drumming down the stained glass panes in dull streaks. The church smelled of soot and rot, water dripping faintly through the eaves into metal buckets I'd placed weeks ago. I was alone, or at least I thought I was, sweeping slowly down the central aisle, and then the sound built around me. A low hum, then another joining, the sopranos rising, the basses threading beneath. The choir had assembled, invisible but overwhelming, their hymns swelling as if the rafters themselves exhaled song. Lux Eterna again, but fuller, echoes rattling far beyond the church walls. My breathing quickened, my heart raced with every chord, and before I realized the danger, my lips parted. Just a hum, a single low note under my breath, pitched imperfectly, but pulled from instinct, from awe. The response was immediate. Every voice dropped out mid-phrase. The silence cracked like a whip in the nave, snapping every shadow taut and still. The air itself grew dense, crushing, suffocating, as if dozens of unseen eyes had swiveled toward me. The church groaned under a weight it hadn't borne in decades, pews creaking though none moved.
I froze, broom clutched like shield, swallowing hard enough to hurt. Then, somewhere immediately behind me, a voice broke the silence.
Why did you sing?
It wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It was whispered, a pitch-perfect mezzo, sung rather than spoken, carried in a quivering vibrato that rapped against the shell of my ear. My sweat ran cold. Trembling, I turned. The pews were empty. The shadows stretched normal, nothing there, but the residue of breath against my cheek. Then the hymn resumed, abruptly, as though nothing had happened. The sopranos led, basses followed, all swelling gently, rhythm unbroken. But this time, their harmony trembled, warped around a new melodic thread, subtle, quiet, but undeniable. They were singing my name over and over, inserting it into the hymn into Latin phrases collapsed around it, 40 scorched voices enunciating syllables that were only mine. I ran before they could finish the verse.
After that night, I couldn't pretend anymore. My name threaded through the hymn like a curse, the choir acknowledging me, inviting me, condemning me. I had to know what had bound them here. So I dug, not in the soil, but in the town's records. The county office kept a thin archive of church history. Most of it was useless fluff. Lists of marriages, baptisms, fundraising achievements from the early 1900s. But then came a folder so worn, so seldom touched, I nearly missed it. Inside, yellowed newspaper clippings. The headlines told enough. Choir tragedy at St. Jude's, 42 perish. Mysterious fire claims congregation. I read every brittle paragraph. It happened in 1963, during evening mass choir practice. The church had been full, children, adults, elderly singers rehearsing for Sunday service.
Accounts varied on how the fire began. Some said a lantern fell, others faulty wiring in the organ. Regardless, flames tore through the nave in minutes. Witnesses claim they heard the hymns continue through the smoke, voices rising stronger even as heat blistered stained glass and rafters screamed. When neighbors broke in, they found the pews collapsed and no bodies whole enough to retrieve. 42 names were listed, forever lost in ash. For weeks, the town smelled like smoke, even far beyond the square. But one line hit hardest. An anonymous witness statement tucked into the article's edge. They didn't scream. They sang. Every last one. They sang until the roof collapsed. My hand shook as I traced those words. I imagined them still in formation, robes smoldering to ash, hands folded to hymnals, mouths shaping notes as their flesh burned away. The fire never claimed them completely. It only kept them here. Other records hinted darkly, rumors hushed, lore whispered. Survivors reported they woke at night to hear faint refrains drifting from the ruins. Restorers sealed the choir loft without touching the scorched floor. Within a year, the parish closed. Too much grief soaked the stone, but grief is sticky. It clings. And in the silence of exile, their song endured.
The night it all broke, I hadn't meant to stay late, but the storm came sudden, hammering rain across the slate roof, thunder cracking the sky wide. Leaving meant crossing the square in a downpour so dense it seemed to swallow sound, so I stayed. The instant the clock struck midnight, the first note rang. Not a whisper this time, not fragments. A full organ chord roared through the nave, pipes shaking dust loose like ash over my head. It was impossible. The organ had been gutted since the 1970s, yet I felt each vibration in my chest as if a massive hand pressed directly down onto me. Then, the voices joined, dozens strong, perfect harmony surging through air so thick it nearly pulsed. Sopranos splitting space like light, basses booming deep enough to rattle glass. The choir had assembled, except this time they did not remain shadows. One by one, figures bloomed from the pews, thin gray bodies clothed in tatters, robes burned but still clinging, faces blurred by time but with mouths perfectly intact, opening and closing in song. Light poured faintly from within their jaws, as if fire still smoldered in their throats. Their rows were exact, their formation flawless. They had returned to their loft and beyond, even spilling into pews. My ragged reflection shimmered across countless eyes, some hollow sockets, some faintly glistening as if wet with tears, and every last one sang my name. The hymn had warped. No longer luxate. Each Latin phrase fell away, replaced with the sound of my syllables, stretched, carried by 40 rusted throats. My name bent into melody, repeated over and over, until the church was less building and more pulsating lung, breathing me.
I staggered backward, hands useless over ears. The song wasn't in the room. It was in my bones, shaking along marrow. Then they turned. Up until now, their gazes had held fast to altar or hymnals unseen. But as one, every face in the spectral choir pivoted. Their eyes locked on me. Pews groaned beneath weightless bodies. Stained glass windows vibrated. They sang with smiles. Wide, tar-black, fire-rimmed grins. The closer their harmony swelled, the hotter the room grew. Sweat slicked my skin until I smelled the faint sting of ash. My breath rasped in smoke that should not exist. Through it all, the pulsing organ carried. A funeral mass that should end in glory, but instead descended into something else. A hunger audible, a need carved into notes, and then, with no gesture, no word, they stopped. Silence crushed the nave flat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't keep my knees locked. A single figure separated from the loft, drifting step by step down the aisle. Her robe burned white, face unrecognizable, yet mouth steady in a frozen O, though no sound emerged. Smoke curled out instead, thick and black, filling her form without burning through. When she passed, I swear I felt heat ache my skin. She extended a hymnal toward me, blackened, pages trembling open as though waiting for me to join. "Sing," she whispered, voice like molten wax dripping straight into my skull.
My mouth wouldn't open. Every fiber in me screamed to refuse, to turn and run, but terror locked me rigid. The ash-blacked hymnal hovered inches from my chest, pages trembling in an unfelt wind. Her hollow eyes, if they were even eyes, waited, like burned feathers. I tore down the nave, boots stammering on warped boards, heart pounding so loud it overlapped with their song. The choir erupted once more, voices splitting in a blast so strong it shattered a stained glass pane overhead. My name bellowed through the organ pipes like a command I had almost obeyed. The door slammed against me as though pushed from inside, nearly throwing me back. I wrestled one open, barely squeezing through before it shut like jaws clamping on prey. Outside, rain lashed cold across my face. The storm had become a downpour so heavy it blurred the square in sheets of silver. For the first time, I was grateful. The water cooled the burning on my skin, drowned the last echoes of that abhorrent hymn. I didn't stop running until I saw the lights of my apartment across town. That night, I sat trembling on the floor, soaked through, my reflection distorted and raindrops sliding down the window. In my pocket was ash. I hadn't touched the hymnal, but page fragments crumbled into my coat lining anyway, etched with faint notes forming the beginning of another hymn. They're still trying to make me sing.
I don't go inside the church after dark now. Sometimes I don't go at all, but the job drags me back. Payment keeps me tethered. And each time I unlock those old brass doors, I feel the air lean in, listening, anticipating the moment I finally break and add my voice. Because now I know what they want. They're not rehearsing hymns for God. God hasn't been there for decades. They rehearse for recruits. And the second your voice joins theirs, even in a hum, you become part of the choir, forever. So listen carefully. If you pass by an abandoned church and catch a note you recognize, keep walking. If you peek through stained glass and see flickers of light while no service is held, avert your eyes. And above all, if an old hymnal is ever placed in your hands, do not sing. You may think you're safe, that faith and disbelief alike are enough to shield you. They aren't. The choir doesn't care what you believe. It only cares if your voice fits. When the harmony swells, when shadows stand straighter than they should, when silence falls too sudden, don't look for the source. Leave at once, because they will notice you, just as they noticed me. And trust me, you don't want your name stretched into a hymn echoing through stone. If you enjoyed this story and want more, like the video to support the channel, subscribe for weekly horror narrations, comment below, would you have taken the hymnal or ran like I did? Because in the end, the choir isn't gone, it never left. And the next time you hear a hymn with no congregation, it may already be calling for you.